Howdy folks, it's CowTipper Vern again. I decided to do an episode talking about exclusivity because it's such an interesting topic and it keeps coming up. It's come up a couple times recently in very new and interesting ways. First of all, I saw some communication between a worker and somebody who'd left meetings talking about how this worker knew that exclusivity was an issue and that the workers were going to have to talk about it at some point. And I just thought, well, how in the world are they going to talk about it? How are they even going to address it? Because they're the one true way. They're God's true way. How in the world can they even address a topic that they're embodying fully? Exclusivity is just the idea that you're the one true thing. Your beliefs are the one true way. You serve the one true God, etc., etc. So the idea that the workers were going to address it or talk about it among themselves and discuss messaging on it is really strange. They never talk directly about it. They just are it. They just believe it. They just exist in an exclusive way. So I thought that was interesting. And that was going through my mind when recently, twice, I saw someone in the X community talking about how they'd left meetings and they'd now found the one true way. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. So the people who are in meetings believe they have the one true way, and they're very confused that other people don't understand it and don't know how to process it. And a lot of people leave meetings because of that, because they don't like the idea that they're being taught that they're the one true people and all their friends and family who don't go to meetings aren't any good and are bad influences on them. And yet people leave meetings and go find another one true way and go find something they believe just as much. And so I thought that was interesting and I wanted to think about it and talk about it a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll just say up front that I don't really have any answers to this topic. I just think it's an interesting topic to kick around a little bit. I think it's worth discussing, and I think it's worth thinking about how humans really want to know what's true, even if they don't and can't. They just really want it. We all do. I do too. But there are some downsides to that, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. First of all, I should probably talk about what I mean when I say 2x2 exclusivity, or exclusivity among the friends, among the professing people, among the workers, saints and servants, etc., in the 2x2 community. It's pretty simple. They believe and teach that they are the one true way, that doing things the way they do it is the only way to do it to get God's approval and go to heaven. They really believe that, and they will teach it explicitly, no questions asked. That's why it's so funny when I hear workers talking about having to address it, because they've never addressed it. They just live it out. To them, there is only one true way to do things. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be workers. 2x2s are exclusive in a lot of different ways. They start out with doctrinal reasons, and that inevitably bleeds into cultural exclusivity, and then a bunch of bad decisions. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with the crisis that's happening with them. First of all, I say doctrinal, but they don't have a doctrine. They'll tell you that. I mean, they do, but it's not well articulated. It's not written down anywhere, of course, so it's in the eye of the beholder. And by beholder, I mean the overseer. They're so exclusive, they don't think they should have to write anything down. You should just know it. God should just teach you, and what he's going to teach you is that they're right. Doctrinal, at the end of the day, just means being in good standing with the workers. There's a lot of doctrinal exclusivity among these people. They don't call it that, but they have it. They believe they're the only right ones. They have the only right ministry. And by right, I'm doing finger quotes in the air, but correct is what they mean. God blessed, God directed, etc. They're the only ones to go to heaven. Everyone else is doomed. They actually really like that. They've split themselves into themselves versus worldly, or godly versus worldly, or God's people versus worldly people. And they have no problem saying that everyone but them is doomed to hell. They'll even say, if you're honest, you'll come to meetings. Honest people, good people, all the good people are in meetings. I'll talk more about that in a second. It's a crazy thing to say, but I think I've said it before. I'm sure I have. They have a unique interpretation of the Bible, and they only use one Bible. They only use the KJV. I've talked about this before, but I think they just use the KJV because it sounds awesome. It says cool words in it like thee and thou and hitherto. Does it say hitherto? I don't know. There's hitherto in a hymn. That's close enough. Every single part of their doctrine separates them from everyone else, and that is the exclusivity. They are exclusively correct, and everyone else is wrong, period. There's no discussion about this. There's no equivocation even. They will tell you boldly that they are correct and everyone else is not. And everyone else is called worldly, and that's bad. The term worldly is generally understood to mean evil, bad, fleshly, of the devil, etc., etc. That's the doctrinal exclusivity, but there's cultural issues as well. Downstream of doctrine is culture. They dress different. The women have to dress a certain way. They have to wear their hair a certain way. They have to wear their hair on their head because they have an exclusive teaching about how your hair has to be based on their exclusive reading of the Bible. And men have standards too. They don't do the tattoos. They don't do jewelry. Again, they read the Bible a very strange way, and it's right. To them, it's right, and it's not to be questioned. And if you don't do these things, if you don't act correctly, or you don't dress the right way, you don't talk the right way, you do anything that the workers are uncomfortable with or the overseer has told you not to do, then you're worldly and you're wrong and you're evil. There's no discussion about this. Nobody is debating theology in this group. They're just following, that's all. Because the overseer knows what to do, and he is exclusively correct. And by the way, each overseer is exclusively correct. I've heard many different overseers teaching different things, and all of the workers underneath them follow those things, whether they like it or not. And sometimes they don't, but they know that they better not step out of line. The us versus them thing plays out in a lot of different ways. The us versus the worldly thing. They love to be separate from the world. They love the us versus the world approach. The God's children versus the world or worldly people approach. It's not even just the people, it's just the world at large. It's everything that's not in meetings is bad. It's wrong, it's evil, it's deceitful, it'll send you to hell if you partake in any way. And you need the workers' approval to get back after you've gone and done something evil like seen a movie in a theater. The cultural exclusivity starts with just a simple us versus them, us versus the world, God's people versus the worldly people. But it goes downhill from there. It's not just as simple as keeping separate from the world. It's keeping separate from anything that's not exactly like you. It's very narcissistic. It's bad enough that the way is best, quote unquote, the way being going to meetings. But it's even worse when you realize that excluding worldly people means excluding almost everyone. The ramifications are pretty ugly. I've mentioned this in other episodes, but I'm going to say it again because it's important. Professing families love to get rid of family members. They love to pull themselves away from family, pull themselves away from friends, keep themselves separate from coworkers. They love to draw lines around themselves as exclusively correct, and they love to separate themselves from everyone else, including people in their own house sometimes. They see it as part of the martyrdom of being a professing person. They see it as part of the sacrifice they have to make. And they process it as a form of piety to eliminate people from their lives that aren't professing enough, even if those people live under the same roof sometimes. Exclusivity means drawing lines between them and everyone else, their family, their friends, and the ways that manifests itself aren't always obvious. A lot of times, it's just not ever visiting family and friends that don't profess anymore. Maybe it's somebody you knew really well growing up. Maybe it's one of your best friends. Maybe it's family that you've grown up with. If one of you stops professing, you can expect to be ignored from there on out. Professing people don't shun formally, but they will shun informally all the time. I personally grew up not knowing many family members that lived very close to me because they had left meetings. And professing family does not interact with unprofessing family if they can help it. Exclusivity is when you walk into a house and you don't see pictures of some of the family, but you do see pictures of the workers. Or maybe you do see pictures of the family, but the owner of the house will point to the picture and point out which ones are professing. You ask them to introduce their family to you, and they'll say, oh, this is my kid who isn't professing anymore, and this is my other kid, and this is my other kid, and here's my other kid that doesn't profess. When they talk in those terms, when you're defined by whether or not you're in or out, that's exclusivity. It feels really good to judge people. They love to do it. Exclusivity is calling people that you've never met aunt and uncle, or aunt and uncle if you're not in the United States. Bringing workers you've never met into your home and trusting them implicitly in a way that you don't trust unprofessing family or unprofessing friends. Exclusivity is shunning the people you know who mean a lot to you and bringing people into your home who aren't safe, but you trust them because they have the right label. They're aunt this, uncle this. They're workers, after all. They're overseers, even. You trust them implicitly. You don't hold anyone accountable. If you don't hold anyone accountable, that's exclusivity. If you decide not to hold people accountable just because they're the right type of person or they have the right beliefs or at least express that, at least profess to have the right beliefs, that's exclusivity. And it goes downhill from there. Exclusivity is believing that you're the right people and then covering up crime, covering up things you know are wrong, blaming victims when things happen. What's happening in the 2x2s right now is because of exclusivity, because they really believe they're good. They believe they are the best people. The last gospel meeting I was in about 2020, the elder brother worker, who was approximately hundreds of years old, said that in his whole life, his experience had been that God's children were the best people. They're the best in business. They're the most trustworthy. They're wonderful people. Everywhere he'd gone, he'd had great experiences. He knew he could trust somebody who was coming to meetings. He knew that. He was thankful for that. Fast forward a few years and you can see that maybe they weren't actually the best people. They were just the most trusted without any accountability. Not calling law enforcement, not getting authorities involved when crime happens, but calling on workers to help you make decisions, looking to workers for guidance on things workers know nothing about, and then looking only at specific versions of the Bible to help make decisions on things the Bible doesn't cover, is exclusivity. It's the worst kind. It's the ugliest kind. And it hurts a lot of people. It has hurt a lot of people. So yes, the workers should address this. They won't, but they should. Believing you're exclusively correct and exclusively right is a recipe for disaster. It limits self-awareness and it limits self-criticism. It limits the analysis of your values that you should be doing. You should be testing your ideas, I think. I feel like that's an important part of my life post 2x2 is just testing my ideas, learning about them completely, learning everything about my ideas. I've changed my mind on a lot of things in my life, probably everything at some point or another, and I might change my mind back again if I get more information, but that's learning. Learning's important. You can't learn when you already know. 2x2s already know. When you're professing, you already know. When you believe your belief system is exclusively correct, you don't measure situations by the outcomes. You measure them by the input. So if something happens and the outcome is bad, you already know the input is good, so the blame must lie in the situation itself somewhere. For the 2x2s, a lot of blame has been passed around to people who have nothing to do with anything. In the 2x2s, in the middle of a gigantic SA scandal, blame is being passed absolutely everywhere except for the people in charge. It's being blamed on the X community, which doesn't make any sense. It's being blamed on lack of faith for a lot of people, which is crazy. And worst of all, it's sometimes being blamed on survivors themselves for not speaking up when they should or something like that. That's really, really offensive. But it's the only way you can think if you're a 2x2. If you're exclusive, you can't possibly be wrong about stuff. There's no way. It isn't plausible. It's not possible in that belief system. Anywhere else in the world, you would judge a decision by the results of that decision. You wouldn't judge the decision to be true to start with. And whatever happens, it gets blamed on somebody else, not the person making the decision. No overseer right now will take any blame for anything that's happened. They can't. Because if they do, then their beliefs are untrue. That's the problem. There's a reason that when lots and lots of people spent months and months of their life, volunteered their time to create some accountability and some guidelines for the ministry, and the overseers just said no. Because to do so would mean that they're no longer exclusive. And their power is based entirely on being exclusive. They are exclusively correct, and that's the only thing that gives them their position. I'm not even blaming them. It's the whole system. And that's why it's very hard for me to see how anything can change and how anything can get better. The corruption and the lack of accountability isn't even the output of the situation. That's the input. The output is crime. The output is a whole bunch of survivors and victims coming forward, showing what happened to them. The output of this situation is an FBI investigation, documentaries, news articles. In hindsight, this is all obvious, but you don't see it coming if your beliefs are exclusive and you believe you're exclusively correct. Accountability doesn't matter if you're exclusive. But it doesn't just stop with 2x2s. Exclusive ways of thinking and one true way type of mindset continues on with a lot of people as they leave meetings. And I've found that to be really interesting to watch. When you're raised in a one true way and something happens, but you're really attached to that idea and it feels very spiritually true to you, sometimes you leave and seek another one true way. For me, that wasn't really the case. I felt like when I was leaving, I was finally free of the one true way idea. I wanted to explore ideas. I wanted to learn things, spiritual things, natural things, you name it. I was excited about the idea of having some freedom, some intellectual freedom, some spiritual freedom in all of this. When the four of us started our support group on Facebook, the majority of people who were joining originally were people who'd been through faith crises, so they kind of understood this. They understood that to transition out of a 2x2 culture, to transition out of the one true way, involved in a faith crisis, implicitly. The idea that you would be raised in the one true way, in something that was true exclusively, and then leaving that meant a faith crisis was involved for sure. You had to have one. A faith crisis was an important part of that transition. Since Brewergate, which is the letter about Dean Brewer that came out that caused a mass wave of victim survivors to come forward and tell their stories, I've noticed a lot of people are leaving meetings, but not due to a faith crisis, and that's a scenario I hadn't foreseen. I hadn't foreseen the idea that people would leave meetings, but not because their faith was shaken, or not because they were bothered by exclusivity. They actually loved the exclusivity. They were leaving because of a really obvious reason. It's unsafe there. There's no accountability. Crimes were being covered up. That's a very obvious reason to leave a group, and good for them for being honest and doing it. It's still hard. It's definitely difficult. Families are being torn apart by this thing. But it's a very obvious thing. It's pretty obvious that if the FBI is investigating your group, you shouldn't be in that group. And yet a lot of people who are leaving now seem to be looking for a new one true way, or seem to be falling in line behind people, certain people. And that's interesting to me. And I'm not judging that at all. We all have different processes, and we have different ways of working our way through our faith crises or whatever. We have different ways of working through our thoughts and feelings about things, especially things as deep and meaningful and disturbing as the SA crisis. But it's just unfamiliar to me. It's interesting to watch a whole bunch of people leave a group because of the most obvious reason imaginable, and then say God called them out. I don't quite understand that. This is just a personal thing. Again, I'm not judging anybody for it. I just think it's interesting. A gigantic scandal happens, a scandal so big it dwarfs most other religious scandals that I'm aware of. The FBI has their own landing page for this scandal, for goodness sakes. And all of a sudden, a bunch of people are called out of meetings. I just find that interesting. A lot of non-believing people are putting in a lot of time and effort and volunteer work into helping survivors, guiding them to places they can go for help, maybe getting funding for them for treatment of some kind, maybe therapy. A lot of people are putting in a lot of work. But there's a subset of people who are leaving meetings, walking across the street to the next church and saying God told them to do it. Maybe he did. I can't speak for God. But I find that interesting. It's interesting that God would choose a time where so many people who aren't necessarily even believing would point out such a blatant error in the church. It implies to me that there hasn't been a faith crisis, and I wonder if there will be one someday. Again, no personal judgment to anybody, none at all. It's just my own perspective. For so long I thought that leaving meetings would require a faith crisis. Mine was a very dark, long, brutal, painful faith crisis. And seeing people leave now very easily, sometimes with all their friends and family in tow, and saying that God just told them to go to this church over here instead, is interesting to me. And that's where I see things like Yes, it's still exclusive. It's just exclusive in my new way. My new way is exclusive. My new beliefs are exclusive. My own faith crisis caused me to lose all that exclusivity. It caused me to step back and realize that there are a lot of different perspectives in the world, a lot of different ideas about things, a lot of different upbringings and cultures that surround every person. And it changes how we view our life. And I feel completely disconnected from the one true way concept. So when I see other people leaving meetings and saying they found the one true way, but for realsies this time, I don't understand that. Just because I was curious, I've looked up a few churches that I know some ex-professing people have gone to and looked at their pages where they outline their faith and listened in or watched some of the sermons. And I have to say, I'm blown away. It's pretty awful. There is some really nasty stuff being preached at a lot of churches these days that I would say is just as exclusive and just as mean-spirited as anything I ever heard in meetings. I saw some videos the other day from a local church that included a multi-part series about how bad being LGBTQ was. It was so offensive and so uninformed also. It wasn't just the LGBTQ part. That's the main part, in my opinion. But those terrible opinions were backed up by really weird reading of Bible verses, completely out of context, and misquoting a bunch of stuff, misquoting people, misunderstanding scientific findings, misattributing quotes to people, misquoting people, taking a lot of information from the outside world to justify their point, and completely misunderstanding all of the info. A lot of what was said in these sermons was patently false. And I'm not just saying I disagree with it or I believe in a different interpretation of the Bible or something. I'm saying was actually wrong. The person leading this church misquoted people several times. And I was kind of blown away by that because it's like, maybe this is what happens when you don't go through the faith crisis, when you don't go through that dark night of the soul where you have to reassess everything. Maybe this is what happens when you're still exclusive. You're just a different kind. I can't relate to people who don't grapple with their faith at all. I can't relate to that. I don't understand it. It just strikes me so odd to think that people could have a major upheaval in their life, like leaving the religion that they were probably born into, and to go through that entire process, as earth-shattering as it is, to go through a huge process like that and a huge upheaval, and then to not bother along the way to try to develop some empathy toward people who, let's be honest, are not that different than yourselves. I don't know. I don't understand that. It kind of bums me out, to be honest. But then again, if a faith crisis isn't what actually led you out, what led you out was noticing something really, really obviously wrong, then I guess that makes sense. You're not going to have much of a change there. In your own mind, I guess that means that you didn't change, everything else changed. And that kind of makes sense. I sort of understand that in a way. I left because I realized that I had changed and my perspective had changed. And my realizations about how I was raised had changed. So built into that is me realizing that I had to tear myself down a little bit and build myself back up again. And to do that, I had to have empathy for things that were different than me because I was now different. So it all makes sense in a way. I don't know. It's confusing, but it makes sense in a way. And again, I don't judge anybody. Everyone has their own project in life, but I don't feel a lot of kinship to people who haven't had to grapple with the exclusivity even of their own beliefs and their own culture and their own ideas that they were raised with and around. You don't have to grapple with your faith when something so obvious as the gigantic CSA crisis, an SA crisis, hits your faith group and you move on to the next faith group. There's no grappling with faith there. There's no analysis of faith. There's no self-awareness. Again, just my opinion, and everyone's free to worship and believe how they do. That's fine. But I think it's worth noting when we're being exclusive, when we've decided that we are the one true anything. I think it's worth always checking in on ourselves and seeing, am I holding myself accountable? Am I holding the people around me accountable? Is this true? Faith can be believing in things you don't see, but it's not disbelieving things you do see. It's worth it, in my mind, to analyze faith now and then, analyze beliefs now and then, religious and otherwise. I don't think I'll ever feel exclusive again. I get it though. Exclusivity feels really good. It feels really good to know you're right and to not have to think about it anymore. That was a key part of our upbringing. Just believing with our whole hearts that we had it right to start with. Not necessarily believing that this was going to send us to heaven, of course. We still had a lot of shame and guilt, but at least we were in the right place. We listened to the right workers. We went to the right meetings. We trusted the right people. Called them aunt and uncle. That's really comfortable, and it makes our brains feel really good. Our brains are wired to simplify the world around us and believe that simple version of it. And that's normal. That's fine. There's really nothing wrong with that, as long as we're not hurting people, and as long as we're not neglecting the people around us, and as long as we're not turning a blind eye to bad activity and to suffering and pain. It's really hard to undo that way of thinking. It seems like our brains are really wired to accept a very simple belief system and a simple understanding of the world, and then to bunch together and seek community and fellowship with people who believe that certain set of things. And I don't think that's wrong, necessarily. I think that's okay, as long as we're not harming people, as long as we're not creating more victims. Sometimes we have to exclude things, but thinking we're exclusive, thinking we're exclusively correct, probably isn't really healthy. We like small groups of people. I remember learning in school about the Dunbar number. It's the number of people our brain can kind of handle thinking about. It's like the optimal size of a community, something like that. We can only keep track of so many things. And growing up in meeting, our world was very small because a lot of the people in that Dunbar number, a lot of the people whose lives we were paying attention to, were ministers that moved around, and we had new ones every year. And it was professing people that we knew everywhere. And our minds just weren't prepped to accept ideas outside of that. There wasn't a lot of professing people, but there was enough. And it made us feel really good to be numbered among those people. In fact, we were told that it was good to be numbered among the faithful. The faithful, of course, were the exclusive. Even though it was comfortable, and even though there's some nostalgia involved in that, like I said in my last episode, I'm still pretty happy to be free of it.